Aquasphere is a game by Stefan Feld. I played a game by Feld in the past that was Trajan, and I enjoyed that pretty much, so I was curious to try another game by this designer. Aquasphere is a Euro game. It is set in an underwater scientific base at the bottom of the ocean, where there are several teams of scientists that are trying to study crystals that have been found there. They are sending out submarines to explore the surrounding areas. They're fighting, it's a big word for a Eurogame, this abstract. They're dealing with octopi that are crawling into the base and getting in the way of what the scientists are trying to do. Therefore, these octopods, as they're calling the game, they reduce the effectiveness of the base, and you have to take these guys out of the way as soon as possible. So there are all of these things that these scientists are trying to do, but one thing that is interesting is that these scientists really have not received the memo about the importance of teamwork and cooperation in the sciences. These scientists are not working together to further the advancement of human knowledge and raise our awareness about the universe around us. No, they're just trying to steal the spotlight from each other, to get in each other's way, to gain knowledge points at the expense of what the other players are doing. So it's not a particularly nice scientific environment to work in, but I guess that is what you have in a game that is competitive in nature, and it has science and scientific research as a theme. Let me show you how the game works. Each player in the game has a player board, such as this one, where the player will place his bots, represented by these wooden pieces here. The bots will be programmed during the game to execute actions for the player, and there's also an area here to place submarines that will be deployed on the board to receive advantages. So you have an area where you're storing your wooden pieces during the game, and then you have an area where you will place bots that you move from your storage area, we'll call it like that, to, and depending on the box where you're placing your bot, you are programming the bot to perform a different action. The main course of events is that you will move bots from here to these boxes here. There can only be up to 2 bots at the same time in the programming area, and then from the programming area we will move the bots onto the main board. Now, there are actually 2 boards in the game. A main board, we'll talk about that in a bit, and a programming board that you use to program your bots. The programming board has several interesting features. One is that around that board you have the scoring track, where you will move this marker here to indicate the score that you have achieved. That track has some obstacles, these red lines here. In order for your score marker to be able to move past one of these obstacles, you need to pay a crystal. There you go. And if you do not have that, you need to deprogram one of your robots, so to move it from the programming area of your player's board to the area where you're just storing your bots. If you cannot do either of those things, then your marker cannot advance, which means that you lose whatever points you are trying to score, and you're not able to if you cannot go past that line. Here is an area that you use to program, and the actions that are available for programming, or better I should say the order in which the actions are available each round, are determined by a card. There is a small deck of cards. You select one per round, and that tells you the configuration in which you need to place these markers here around the programming board, which means next round I will move the markers differently, giving these markers a different order and configuration. During the game, one of the options that you have is to program your bots, and one of your way of programming a bot is you move a scientist that you have here, and you move it from the initial box. This is where the scientist starts at the beginning of each round, and you move that from a box that is connected with an arrow, so you follow the arrows. If I'm moving my scientist from here to here, then I'm able to program a bot to perform this action. Then maybe next round I'll move my scientist here, now I can program a bot for that action, and so on and so forth. When your scientist is in one of these 3 boxes, then you can choose to pass, and In that case, you place your marker here to indicate that the order in which players pass around is over when all players have passed, and the order in which they pass determines the order in which the players will play next round. As for the main board, here it is. Here is the main board. It has a central area that indicates the round that is being played, the number of points, of victory points certain things are worth, and then the areas, the play area is divided in sectors that are connected with locks. Each player has a scientist in one of the sectors, and the scientist during the game will move from sector to sector and will be used to perform actions that the bots are programmed to perform, to support. In any case, in order to be able to perform actions, you need a cooperation of a scientist in a sector and a bot that you will place in the sector. You also have these markers here, if marker is the right term. Each player receives one. This represents your storage area. It indicates the maximum amount of resources that you can store. So at the beginning of the game, everybody receives a piece such as this one, and they can have up to 4 time markers, 2 action cards, 2 crystals, and they can remove 2 octopods. During the game, you can perform actions to add sections to your storage area. So when you perform the action that allows you to add sections, you simply draw a tile and you place it by your little area like this. And that, as you can see, gives you extra storage. In this case, if this is the case, I would be able to store up to 4 crystals in my storage area, in my personal pile. And these letters here indicate scoring advantages and other types of advantages that you receive when you expand your personal storage area. Each turn you can perform 1 or 2 actions. Well, I guess it could be 3, but what the third one is to pass, so it's not all that interesting. As for the actual actions, you have 2 of them. One is to program a bot, and that means to place a bot from your storage area to one of these areas here, preparing the bot to perform an action for you. There are 2 ways of doing that. One we saw earlier is to move your scientist in an area that corresponds to a box, to an action in a box, and then you simply place the bot on the corresponding action, like that. And the other way is to pay 3 time markers. This is the most important currency in the game. There are a lot of things that depend on the number of time markers that you have and that you commit. So, pretty simple. Programming a bot simply means to get a bot ready in that specific area of your player aids, of your play card. The most important thing that you do with the bots is to carry out actions with them. There's another way that you can do, that you can use them when you deprogram them, which can be to pay for penalties or simply to exchange the program of a bot for time markers. But the most important thing to do with the bots is to use them to perform actions. Now, when you take the other option, which is to carry out an action with a programmed bot, there are several steps. One, which is optional, you can move your scientist that you have in the lab from one sector to another. And you may have to pay time markers depending on the number, on the lock or locks that you're moving through to move your scientist. So to move from here to here would cost me a time marker. Then you will place your scientist in one of the colored areas of the sector in which the scientist is, depending on the action that you want to perform. I want to perform this action, then I place it here. I want to perform this action, I place it there, so on and so forth. Finally, I take a bot from the player's card and I place it in the central area of the sector in which my scientist is performing the action. In that case, then simply carry out the action, and you have a section in the rulebook that tells you what those actions are. Another important thing, though, is that when you're performing an action, you're placing a program bot in the central area of a sector, and it stays there. But if there was a bot there already from another player, then you place yours in where that of the opponent was, and you place your own here in this section of the sector, which is the loading area, and there's a certain number of bots depending on number of players, which is the maximum number of bots that can be in a sector. When the number is reached, then players must return all of their bots but one from the loading area of the sector where that function was triggered to their personal player's card. And this is really the main idea. These are the options that you have to program bots or to place bots on the board, which you do in conjunction with moving your scientist around. When you perform actions, then you simply perform the function that is related to the action. For example, the grid action here is to expand the lab, which is what gives you extensions to your personal storage area. You can take time markers, then you can take all of the time markers that may be in the area with a minimum of 2, if there are less than 2 there, but up to the maximum allowed by your storage capacity. You may take crystals, which are used for various functions, especially to be able to score. Octopods, another action is to remove octopods. There are these little critters, these little annoying pests that pop out in the lab from time to time, and they give negative points. If during a scoring phase you have a bot in an area with octopods, then you lose points, which means you may decide to spend an action to catch the octopods that are in the area that is of interest to you. Also, you may place a submarine. Submarines are initially on your card, and each sector has a blue area where you can place a submarine. You can only place one submarine of your type per sector, not multiple ones. And submarine areas where you place them have a cost in time markers that you need to spend when you're performing that action. And the earliest ones, the earliest spaces, cost less. So if you're waiting a long time before you start placing down your submarines and the better locations have been used, then it's going to be more expensive because you have to spend extra time markers to place your submarine there. Each area on the board also has a research card. These cards that have these completely impenetrable visual reminders. Of course, they wanted to go languageless, so they didn't have to translate the game, at least translate the cards, but some of these symbols are pretty mysterious and complicated. You have a range of cards that you will shuffle together. You will place an action card or research card in each sector at the beginning of the game. Then multiple times during the game you will refill those slots, and you simply need to use the back of the rulebook where you have a player aid that tells you the meaning of those symbols, and that tells you what the card can do for you. These are special action cards, and some actions can be used whenever the situation applies. Some other actions can be used once per game, and some during the intermediate score. There's a card that needs to be used immediately. But the general idea is that you're grabbing cards, and there is a maximum number of cards that you can have based on your storage capacity. Even if the card that you grabbed and used doesn't apply anymore, the effect is useless to you, you cannot discard it. It still stays there with you just to annoy the whatever out of you and simply limiting your capacity. If you want extra cards, once you reach the limit, you need to build a bigger lab. You can also use an action in the sector to program a bot. It has that action there, in which case you take the next bot from your player card and you place it in a programming area corresponding to the action indicated by the sector. Each sector has a different action connected with the program a bot action in the sector. And you continue like this, moving your scientist around, performing actions and programming your bots until all players have passed. At that point, the round is over and you have intermediate scoring. During intermediate scoring, players score points for controlling the majority of the sectors, that is, for having bots in the majority of the central spaces on the board. Remember, each sector only has one area where a bot can actually be. If there is a majority, the player with the majority scores points. If two or more players are tied, then they all get points. They get 3 points. The number of bots the players have in play will give them points. Crystals the players have in their supply score points, and then there are negative points to be lost if octopods are in the areas that the players control. Then you kind of repopulate the board by adding new crystals, adding new cards, adding new sections of the labs. You also look at the style here that tells you about other things that need to be added, such as octopods and time markers. You use these styles at the beginning of the game, place them randomly with their random orientation that tells you where stuff will pop out next round, and then you remove the topmost of these tiles and you reveal the next one, which will indicate the stats that will apply to the following round when you repopulate the board the next time. And you continue like this for 4 rounds until the end of round 4. At the end of round 4, you still do phase of intermediate scoring, even though intermediate at that point may seem semantically inappropriate. But after you do that scoring, then you also have the final scoring, which is an extra round of scoring, in which player receive victory points for the different letters that they have in their lab. The more letters they have collected, the more points they will score at the end of the game. Then they also score points for time markers that are still in their area. If they have deployed all of the submarines in the station, they get points, and also if they have completed a lab by adding all 5 expansions, they score points for that. And at that point, the player with the highest amount of points is the winner of the game. Theme is certainly not the strongest element of this game. This game is pretty abstract in nature. The mechanics and the theme don't seem to have much to do with one another. Something that I find strange is that it looks like I'm programming a bot to do something. I'm sending the bot to the control space, the central space of a sector, and then the bot is not doing the thing I programmed the bot to do. The scientist is doing it, almost as if I'm using the bots to deliver messages to the scientists, and then they're like, oh, okay, then I'll go do that stuff. Engineers among you probably have figured out an explanation for this. Maybe this will seem incredibly thematic to you, but not to me. The theme is not perspicuous at all. It is not apparent at all. And other mechanics also do not really help much in figuring out what the theme may be or getting a sense of how the theme works. I guess that the art on the components, the player boards and the main boards tries to give at least a sense of the theme, at least a little bit of atmosphere, but I find that, well, that happens to an extent. It also happens at the expense of simplicity. These boards were looking pretty. I think, I don't know, I could just put them on the wall as works of art. As game components, they look a little too busy. I find them not particularly pleasant as game components. The colors are nice, the drawings, the art are nice. It's just that the game component feels a little too busy. I like my game components to be a little more visually accessible. Talking about other things that are related to the game but are not exactly gameplay, the rulebook. I found the rulebook to make it disproportionately hard to learn the game. Disproportionately based on how the game happens to be pretty simple in essence. It is just that as I was reading the rulebook, I thought, oh my gosh, I need to go back to my advanced war games. Those I can get. This stuff is hard. There were a lot of notions at the beginning of the rulebook before the rulebook started really explaining how gameplay works and turn structure works, and that confused me a little and made it harder to learn the game than I think it could have been. The game is in essence not hard at all. It is program your bots or execute your actions and figure out ways through these 2 basic choices that you have to score as many points as possible, which you do by collecting the right combination of resources in an interaction with the other players. This is really the key description of the game. This is pretty much what the game is. So it is not hard, and as I started playing the game, I was like, oh, okay, this is not as difficult as I thought it was. So don't get discouraged if the rulebook seems a little bit confusing, if there's a lot of detail that seem to be unnecessary at the beginning. Also, the rulebook will tell you how to set up the game, and setup is a bit of a laborious process. If you delegate different tasks, different players to set up the game, that's going to be much better. That will cut down on setup time, because there's a lot of stuff that you need to do to set up the game. But if you're working as a teamwork, that's fine. And that's probably the last time that you will work as a teamwork with your opponents here, because this game is pretty competitive. It's a Euro game, yes, it's abstract, and there are things in which you're just looking at your board and designing your strategies, but actually it's a game that both directly and indirectly is pretty interactive. Directly in the sense that sometimes you need to steal the spot from the opponents because you want to gain majority to score. Majority of the sectors that you control. Other times you're pushing your bots in certain sectors so that then they will affect the number of bots in the loading area, and that will affect the number of bots that are sent back to the players. So you're trying to manipulate the number of bots that players have left on their player boards by sending back certain bots at certain times. And that is direct influence. Indirect influence is when you're trying to see what the opponents are trying to do, and you do it before they are doing it. When you're trying to get a certain resource to deny to an opponent. And of course you have to take into account that the opponents maybe do that to you. The resources are limited, so it is a bit of a racing game in that sense, but of course the objectives of the race emerge only if you're paying attention to what the players are doing, and if you have a clear idea of what the heck it is that you're doing and what are the things that you should be gaining, controlling for your direct interest, and to deny resources to the opponents. So I found that to be a pleasant surprise. I really was afraid that the game was going to be a little too dry and multiplayer solo, but that was not the case. I found that all parties really benefit from keeping an eye on each other and playing in the mindset of a limited environment with limited resources, where everything that you do is relative to what the opponents are doing. Similar to another game by Feld that I played in the past, Trajan, I like the fact that there are a lot of options, a lot of things that you can do, all pretty much good. It's just slightly better, slightly less good depending on the varying circumstances, and that again I like, makes everything relative to the situation of the group, the situation of gameplay. But I like the fact that you're grabbing stuff. All of these options make you feel good because you're getting a lot of resources. I'm grabbing a crystal, I'm grabbing time markers, I'm expanding my personal storage area, hooray! It is just that there are so many things that you want to do and you should be doing, that it is a matter of prioritizing and figuring out how to prioritize and when and towards which goals. So it's a huge element of the game, is one of the key elements of an effective strategy. From the point of view of the experience of gameplay is definitely engaging because there's so many paths to victory that you're constantly analyzing. There is interaction, there are challenges, there is long-term strategy, and also a little bit of tactical reaction to things that change around. Definitely enough interesting decisions to keep me interested, to keep any player who enjoys Eurogames interested and thinking and developing strategies. In this sense, it's a very engaging game. The dark side of that, of course, is always the danger, the risk, or the possibility of analysis paralysis. I think that this game will not go well in certain groups with certain players. If you have the analysis paralysis gamer, hey, well, you will need to push that play a little bit here, because there definitely is the temptational list of overthinking things that may happen. Try to think of what everybody can do, and then as you're trying to discriminate among possible options that you have, or trees of options, then game may slow down, especially if you're playing with 4 players. It can get a little problematic if one or more players are prone to analysis paralysis. Overall, this is a meaty Eurogame, not necessarily for the casual Eurogamer, but for anybody who has a serious interest in Eurogames, or in any case, in general, in games that may not be very thematic, but definitely have engaging mechanics with a lot of challenges and choices, then Aquasphere definitely is a good option. Personally, I enjoy playing this game, and I believe that many other players will enjoy playing this game too.